This is a world in many ways that's far more complicated than the world many of us grew up in, given the diffusion of power, the fact that we no longer live in this relatively straightforward bipolar world, but in a world where all sorts of individuals and groups and countries can wield all sorts of power. We're here at home. The complexity of what is going on in our society is far greater than it ever was before. The environment in which policy is made is far more complex than it ever was before, and I thought that people needed something of a roadmap for how to decide what it is to do and what not to do, to choose priorities. We can't do everything everywhere every time. We have to have some basis, some mechanism for choosing, and if we simply react to what comes at us, we're going to be really disadvantaged because a lot of stuff is coming at us fast and furious. But what we've got to do is remember two things. We've got to limit our involvement to a level where we think we can actually accomplish things. It doesn't always make sense to do more if you don't get more for it. And second of all, we've got to take a step back. The Middle East is not the entire chessboard. It is a square on the chessboard. And we've got to think not simply then about the direct costs, but if you will, the indirect costs. If we do more things there, what can't we do as much of in other parts of the world or here at home? So I am arguing for a slight dialing down, if you will, of our ambitions in the Middle East, at the same time a dialing up of what we do in Asia. And the reason is in Asia and the Pacific, that's the part of the world where the great powers are increasingly interacting, where after 3 decades of essentially an economic dominated region where growth was phenomenal, we're beginning to see the stuff of history happening in Asia. Nationalism, great power competition and friction, the relationship among major powers such as China, Japan, divided Korean peninsula still, the reality of nuclear proliferation, and so forth. And what we have then in Asia, unlike the Middle East, is two things. One is we actually do have the major powers of this era. And second of all, I would argue the United States is in a position, given its instruments of power, its Navy, its Air Force, its economy, its diplomacy, to influence developments there. So I'd also argue we should be doing more closer to home in North America. This is a part of the world where we have 450 million people, the United States, Canada, Mexico. We're energy self-sufficient, and we actually have the potential to be the engine of global economic growth. And I would think that we need to be very creative about things like a next generation of NAFTA, greater integration in North America, and to think about how we can build not just a greater community in the energy, but in economics and other parts of life. So again, this is a rebalancing within foreign policy, and then secondly, a rebalancing between foreign policy and what goes on here at home. And what I would simply say here at home, and we can talk about it in greater detail, is that we've got to rebuild and restore the foundations of American economic growth. This is a really rare moment in history, where for now 25 years, the United States has not woken up every day facing a great power rival. Most of history of the last few hundred years in the modern era of international history, say since the mid-17th century, most of it has been one or more great powers interacting. And if you think about the 20th century, you had 2 world wars and you had a Cold War. Well, here we are now. Next year, by the way, marks the 25th anniversary of the end of the Cold War. On 11/9, it will be 2014. And the United States doesn't have a great power rival. This gives us tremendous time and space to focus here at home. Again, it doesn't mean ignoring the world. This is not isolationism, but it does mean a rebalancing. So we ought to take advantage of this opportunity and rebuild our capacities so we can discourage the emergence of a great power challenger. If one emerges, we can cope with it. But what we've got to do is have the discipline both to limit or to redirect what it is we do abroad and to do what needs doing here at home. The sequester is really dumb public policy. It is lowest common denominator public policy because it treats all spending equally. But all spending is not equal. Some spending is investment. Some spending is not. So what you want to have in a budget is to favor investment. But the sequester doesn't do that. On top of that, what the sequester is dampening down economic activity in the short run at a time where we're growing only half or 2/3 our historical average. So the sequester has it exactly wrong. What you want to do is actually increase economic stimulus now, I would argue,
help get things up to higher levels. But you want to deal with the long-term challenge of entitlements. So rather than think about limiting short-term spending, you want to actually have more short-term spending of the right sort, i.e. investment in physical capital and human capital, and you want to lock in reductions in the long-term growth of entitlements. We do none of that. So we've actually got it exactly wrong in how we're going about this. We talked before about the energy situation. We still show a tremendous capacity for innovation, and that will make us, by the way, much more competitive. If we pass comprehensive immigration reform, I think it's a multiple game. We'll get 12 million Americans out of the shadows on a path towards full participation in our society. We'll increase the inflow of talented people with advanced degrees and skills. If we invest in our infrastructure, which, by the way, takes virtually no public money through public-private partnerships, we can make ourselves, again, much more competitive in that way. To make our schools better, it doesn't take more money. It simply, again, means that we've got to have more higher quality teachers, which means putting more investment in the good ones and getting rid of the bad ones. We can deal with our entitlements. No, all of our challenges are fixable. And the real question to me is whether our politics are up to the challenge. It's the reason, again, I wrote this book, that I think the greatest threat facing us is nothing out there. It's not China, it's not Russia, it's not Pakistan, it's not Syria, it's not Iran. It's none of these. These are all manageable challenges. It's not even things like climate change, which we haven't talked about. These are serious challenges, but potentially, I think, manageable challenges if we put our house in order. And the reason quite honestly, I got out of my safe, comfortable space as a foreign policy guy in the world that people like Michael and I have occupied now for decades. And I'm writing about things like how to reform American politics and what we should be doing with local education or what have you, is I actually think this is now the principal determinant of American national security. It is what we do and don't do here at home. And if we get it right, I think the 21st century could be another American century. And if we get it wrong, then we will have no one to blame but ourselves.